Good evening, everybody. This is the Employment Informative Speech. And this is, I want to start with our introduction. So, a statistics from Autism Speaks says that approximately 1 in 44 children in the US is diagnosed with some form of autism on the spectrum. So, that's a pretty large number in the grand scheme of things. We have our interviewee. Her name is Teresa Talbot, and she is a certified and licensed behavioral analyst, and she is a clinical director at Behavioral Innovations. So today we're going to be talking about autism and her experience and give you guys some information on her line of work. So Teresa, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your educational background, and how you got started, and real basic what the requirements are to be a clinical director?
Sure. Well, I started the professional part of my career at a preschool. I worked in a classroom that was specifically for kids who were on the autism spectrum. After that, I worked in in-home ABA therapy while I was getting my undergrad in psychology. Then I got my master's while I was doing parent consulting, supervision. I worked in clinics, in school, and in home. Then after my master's, I accrued my hours for the certification. So part of the certification requirements is not only a master's in a related field, but then you have to take your board certified coursework. And then you have, depending which route you go, it's either 15 to 2,500 hours that you have to accrue under someone who is certified. After that, you take a test, and then you become board certified. And then depending on what state you're in, some require a license and some do not. And Texas is one of those, so I got my license as well.
Well, that was a very good description, and I appreciate you keeping it short. I know you could talk about that for hours. So basically what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about autism research and treatment, why it's lacking and why it should be a bigger focus. We're going to talk about early diagnosis, and we're going to talk about what's out there for public support systems for people with autism. So let's start with early diagnosis. What are a few areas you believe could be improved on with early diagnosis, or things you think are just lacking, inadequate?
Sure. Well, I can say the biggest thing here in San Antonio is we do not have enough developmental pediatricians. Those are the ones who can give the diagnosis for a child, whether or not they're on the autism spectrum. There are other clinicians that can help run the diagnostic tools, but developmental pediatricians are the only one that can actually give that diagnosis. So right now, that is currently the big deficit. The other one is Texas has approved Medicaid now, but now a lot of companies are getting bombarded with too many clients, and they're not able to grow quick enough to support all these families who have been waiting years for Medicaid to get approved for ABA therapy. So there's your other kind of catch with it all.
So those are two really big things. And all right, so let's go to our next topic, and that's government funding. So how do you feel government funding is adequate, and do you feel like it could be improved on in any way?
I definitely think it can be improved on. My clients that have Medicaid, which is given by the government, they have the most requirements for a clinician to work with these kiddos. And a lot of times they don't give us enough hours to complete all the things and requirements that they want. So we have to spend extra time to make sure that our clients are getting what they need, even though they're not covering these services. So Medicaid could learn a lot by going through other private insurance companies that have been funding this to figure out what's really required to support these children.
And so you think increased funding or an increased focus would accomplish that task?
I think that would definitely help.
I agree with you. All right, so we're going to talk about the last issue, last topic, and that's going to be public support systems in general for adults with autism. Are there any public support systems in place for these kind of people?
In the state of Texas, I cannot comment. I know that there is in California, but I have to say from personal experience, I have a brother who is on the spectrum and he is now an adult. And adult services are the hardest to acquire and the hardest for companies to want to provide because, once again, it has very little funding because all of the research is mainly on early intervention, and people tend to forget that these kids grow up and they're adults and they're still going to need support throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. So I think we're getting close on time here. So let's go ahead and conclude what we've discussed. So we talked about early diagnosis. We talked about government funding, and we talked about public support systems in place. So autism isn't talked about as much as other mental illnesses. It's not focused on, and it's a large percentage of people who have mental illness are on the spectrum with autism. So that's what we wanted to cover and we wanted to address today. Teresa was nice enough to be a participant in the speech and give some background information on her education, what she went through, the requirements. So I think we'll end it there, and thank you for listening, and I hope you guys have a great evening.